This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Our text today is Genesis, the second chapter, verses 18, 21 to 22, and chapter 3, 6 through 7. Got some sections of the story here because the woman we wish to focus on today is the first woman, Eve. Eve comes as humanity bursts onto the scene in the second chapter because God notices that the single human, Adam, creature of the dirt, if you're feeling extra powerful, gentlemen, the creature of the dirt should not be lonely. There's something about him that isn't complete yet. Fashioning him from the mud and having him stand up and breathing life into him didn't create a complete being. And so God determines that this being needs to be bonded with something else. And they go through all of the other animals and try to find the best mate. And finally, nothing works. And so God falls a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he takes a rib from his side, and he creates a piece of humanity so that there are two, and that is what becomes humanity. You see, to be human is to be in relationship. There's an African word called Ubuntu, and it resists the Cartesian idea that I think, therefore I am an individual. I'm an island unto myself. And instead says, I am because you are. Because we are. Rugged individualism is a manufacture of the Enlightenment and part of the American experience and all of Western civilization that really doesn't stand up very well. You can't be a human by yourself. Without the ability to love and to serve and to nurture others, you can't be a human. As a matter of fact, when we find ourselves saying, oh, well, that's inhuman, or we see people behaving in inhuman ways, it's because they become absorbed by sin, which Luther defined as being curved in on yourself, being too much of an individual. So God creates humanity in two parts. Ish, the Hebrew says, and Isha. They complete one another. Now, the story goes on, and it tells us that there was only one rule in the Garden of Eden, and you know that. They should not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which stood in the center of the garden. Now, before we go too far with this, we have to be careful that we don't read this literally, that we're talking about some actual garden that lived somewhere, and that there was apples or avocados or grapes or whatever the fruit was, and God said, don't eat that fruit, or somehow you will change, and that'll be bad. There's an element of disobedience to this, but this is a mythic story that tells us why things are the way they are. And the principal thing that it tells me is why I am different from my dog, or a cow, or any other animal on the earth. Humans are different because we know that we die. We know when we suffer, and we know when we're different from one another. Dogs don't know they're different from another dog. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure my dog thinks I'm a dog. But humans know. And sin comes when death and suffering and knowing the differences lead to blame and lead to violence and lead to harm. This is the story that the Hebrews told their children so they could understand why it is that we humans do know the difference between good and evil. As one commentator says, you can't stay in paradise forever, is what this is about. And when Eve takes a bite of the fruit of the tree because she's tempted by the snake, it is in fact disobedience, but it is also an inevitable outcome of growing and developing as a human. of being two pieces of the same humanity. Eve reaches out not only for power, which is how the story is read often, to be like God, as the story is read often, but to move on from paradise into the reality of living the human life that we know is true. I have to admit to you, I don't believe that there was a time when everything was hunky-dory. I think that humans have suffered for the whole existence of humanity, and this story is a way of telling us how we went from being the beloved creatures of God to being the people we actually are. And the story of the knowledge of good and evil, and how Adam and Eve both ate of the fruit of the tree and had their eyes opened, how they began to notice differences between them, which has led to all kinds of evil between men and women throughout the centuries, is what led God to cast them from the garden, to make them grow up, to make them live in the world as it really was, not as they hoped it would be. You see, suffering, death, and the differences between us are real, and we know about it. And I believe that Genesis teaches us that God weeps because now, with the knowledge of good and evil, now with the knowledge of suffering and death and the differences between people, that they know what God knows. And that is a mighty weight to carry. We are not only unified with God in God's image to be creative and to be filled with joy, but now, because of human rebellion, we are also open to understand that the world is full of suffering and pain, and that death comes to each one of us unavoidably. And so God, with a tear, casts us from the Garden of Paradise into the real world. And I think that's what the Hebrew people wanted to know from this story. Why are we the way we are? And this story gives us a way of living into what it means to be mature people, bonded together to live in community with all its difficulties. So thanks be to Eve. Thanks be to Eve and to the other creature who opened their eyes and became fully human. Amen.